If you are a younger millennial, chances are that some of your earliest memories of surfing the internet, using the computer at the school computer lab, also involved these weird, rather colorful and abstract animations taking over your screen. These ranged from very straightforward geometric patterns and shapes to the humorous and even a bit surreal. These continuously growing pipes, flying toasters, and an unpredictable maze to nowhere offered unintended viewers a liminal, dreamlike experience. I say unintended because these animations were not meant for your entertainment and uninterrupted observation. They were meant for the screen. Screensavers, as they would soon be called, their entire design was to keep a computer monitor busy during long periods of inactivity. But why is that necessary? If the computer is inactive, why not just shut the screen off? Where do these screensavers come from? And why were they so weird? While much of these are intended to take advantage of this technology in a fun way, many of its characteristics that we retroactively view as peculiar were really just indirect byproducts of the time. And I think their very existence and continued legacy actually say quite a lot about this current generation of young adults and how they are both observing and changing the world around them.
We could certainly learn a thing or two about a thing or two. My viewers always ask me, Cameron, you're the Casanova of San Francisco. How do I get a girl? Well, just tell her how groovy she is. Chicks dig that, man. You know what they also dig? Is glasses. Warby Parker glasses, to be specific. Here I have the Chemi-Wide and Licorice Crystal with the anti-reflective and scratch-resistant coating, so that I can not only get a good glimpse at those who worship me, but now I can also see all the success and potential that the universe has laid out for me. And thanks to Warby Parker's love for their customers, you can go into any Warby Parker store and get your glasses personally stylized, with the help of friendly advisors, just like I did. With Warby Parker, I just feel whole again, man. The ladies just can't get enough of it. I don't know if it's them reminiscing of their adolescence, rocking out to Buddy Holly, but it's freaking transcendental, man. You can get your own Warby Parker glasses today by visiting the QR code on the screen or the link down below. Pairs start at $95 plus free shipping and free 30-day returns, and even gives you the option to use vision insurance. And every purchase you make gives someone in need their own pair of eyeglasses through Warby Parker's Buy a Pair, Give a Pair program. Now that's out of sight, if you ask me. See what I did there? Stay cool, Warby Parker.
When personal computers first emerged, the vast majority of them used cathode ray tube monitors, or CRT for short. These are the same kind of monitors that made up old school televisions, and they worked like so. You have a screen coated in something called phosphor. At the back is a vacuum-sealed glass tube that contains an electron gun. This device shoots a beam of electrons while a deflection yoke directs the beam to hit certain parts of the screen at certain times, depending on what image it is trying to display. This all happens super rapidly, so rapidly that our eyes can't keep up, allowing us to see a complete image on the screen. As remarkable as this was, CRT proved to not be the most practical invention long term. In addition to being absolute death machines, this phosphor coating introduced a big problem. This phosphor is what turned the energy from the electron beam into light that our eyes can see, but if the beam hit the same spot way too frequently in a short amount of time, it could cause this phosphor to degrade, leaving a permanent dark spot. In other words, if the same image was shown on the screen for several hours at a time, it would effectively burn in a photo-negative version of that image. It's kind of like those cool after-image posters, the ones you typically see at fun houses or the circus. You stare at an image for a long time, then you look away, and an inverted version of that image stays on your retina for at most a few minutes. But with CRTs, this would often be permanent. So if you left your Apple II on all night and forgot to change the screen, you may find yourself in a world of trouble once you turn it off. This is when screensavers entered the picture, as they are literally saving the screen from CRT burn-in. But why is an animation necessary? why not just have the screen shut off or show just the color black when it is inactive? There's a few reasons for this. For one, CRT monitors at the time did not have a true sleep mode. They instead had to be powered off separately from the computer. Frequently turning the CRT monitors on and off too much can damage them. So if they were to just keep shutting off because of computer inactivity, that would become a problem right away. Yes, you could just have it show a black screen and that would solve the burn-in issue, but that introduces a diagnostics problem. Someone who has just a black screen on might get confused and think that the computer is off, so they may accidentally leave it on for long periods of time, or maybe even turn it off thinking that they are turning it on, and potentially lose data as a result. That is why the screensaver came in handy. It not only allowed for this electron beam to constantly move all over the screen so that more spots don't get way more exposure than others, but it also let the user know that their device was idle but not fully turned off. It was a very transparent approach that also solved a bunch of different problems. People discovered the advantage of this approach not too long after personal computers became a thing. Some of the earliest precursors to screensavers were popping up in the late 1970s on some Atari consoles and even on the Apple Lisa by the early 1980s. But in 1983, we get the release of the first official screensaver, the kind that we have come to recognize today. It was first advertised in the Apple II magazine Soft Talk and literally coined the term screensave, and it was indeed just a black screen. But for those reasons we mentioned earlier, this would prove to not be very practical. Again, it made more sense to actually show something, both to preserve the monitor and to let the user know that the machine was still on. So, developers started to build on the color cycling effects that idle Atari machines would show. So by the late 1980s, you start to see a variety of screensaver packages popping up, such as Magic Screensaver for Windows 2.0, and arguably the most notable, James Eastman's After Dark for both Windows and the Macintosh. One of the weirdest and most memorable of these would be the flying toasters. Eastman claims that he got the idea for it one night when he was very sleep deprived and was walking around his house looking for inspiration, when he came across his toaster. Due to its random and humorous design, it quickly became a hit. Other notable ones they made included an aquarium, a nighttime city skyline, and some psychedelic kaleidoscope patterns. But of course, by the 90s, personal computers were getting way more popular, not to mention exponentially more powerful and cheaper. With CRT monitors also still reigning at this time, this meant that the demand for screensavers was rapidly growing. Additionally, it was now becoming easier for everyday computer users to familiarize themselves with a cool new technology called 3D graphics. This would only explode in popularity with the release of a film called Toy Story. And so, many developers saw screensavers as the perfect medium for showing off a personal computer's greatest capabilities in a relatively risk-free environment. In 1992, Microsoft began working on OpenGL, a whole new graphics API specifically designed for 3D renderings. As they began working on what would be their milestone consumer operating system, Windows 95, they wanted OpenGL to eventually become an integral part of it. But they needed to wait a few more years before they could do that. So, the most effective way of giving users a taste of these 3D capabilities was through screensavers. Naturally, the first edition of Windows 95 officially introduced Microsoft's new 3D screensavers to its home PC users. I would say that this is when screensavers really started to become a familiar concept to everyday people, and introduced them to a very mesmerizing experience. The ones in this package included the star field, the constantly changing 3D shapes that were just full of color, the flying and shiny Windows logos, 3D text, and the infinite pipes, which would generate random, seemingly unending patterns across the screen. These graphics were now capable enough to show off textures that looked like the pipes were made of metal. You could even go in and pick the colors of your choice. You still had the more basic abstract designs from days of old, but now you actually had much more of a choice in the matter. The most memorable and arguably most unsettling screensaver was the Windows 95 maze. This was apparently inspired by the video games of the time, such as Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, and it is apparent right away. It has a very similar design and vibe to that gameplay. The fact that it looks too realistic and detailed to be a part of a cartoony environment, while also not looking real enough to be a part of real life, is what famously puts it in that uncanny valley realm. Our minds are just not exactly sure what to make of it. This is further amplified by just how unpredictable this maze is. There are no rules or expectations that are set. For example, you have random rodents that pop up and sometimes walk backwards, and you also have random shapes lying around and some walls that are textured with random images. This adds a bit of an unintended mystery to the whole thing. What is this place? Where is it? And why is it here? Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, screensaver popularity continued to grow. And thanks to the emergence of the internet, you could now also download screensavers from other people, or even make your own, which you could then share with the world. But screensavers were not just for computers either. As we mentioned, it was for protecting CRT monitors, so televisions were getting them as well, with the most notable example being the bouncing DVD logo. This one was particularly fun because it would bounce around seemingly random parts of the TV. A collective memory from many people at that time was them watching this in the hopes that the logo would eventually perfectly hit the corner of the screen.
Some days I am just on fire.
Apple also had its share of iconic screensavers, especially with the release of macOS X in 2001. Apple's screensavers were pretty much just the ones you already saw in the Windows 9X era, but with much better graphics, as PC technology had gotten even better by the early 2000s. But this growing technology also made the Apple screensavers interesting in a whole other way. They weren't exactly necessary. Apple starts indirectly showing us a whole new era of screensavers, the novelty era. By the 2000s, CRT monitor sales were at a huge decline, with the much more lightweight and futuristic OLED and LCD screens entering the picture. Because these didn't use electron beams, burn-in was effectively no longer an issue. These screens would even surpass CRTs in sales by 2007, but Apple had moved away from this much earlier. Nearly all of their Macintosh products had moved over to LCD screens by 2002, with the only exception being the eMac, which was also discontinued not too long after. So, the release of macOS X and Apple's mass adoption of LCDs happened at nearly the exact same time. This meant that this was one of the first times where new innovative screensavers were introduced that didn't actually do anything. Because these were LCDs, there was no screen to save. It was just meant to make the computer look prettier and to give people something to look at when they weren't using it. It was a great opportunity for Apple to show off its new Aqua design and for Mac users to further personalize their workspace. The most iconic Mac screensaver would definitely be the Flurry, which has a sort of calming Northern Lights kind of vibe. There were also a few nature-oriented ones, with patterns that resembled fog and ocean waves. It also had some psychedelic, colorful ones, 3D text, and even a dictionary word of the day. You could even make your screensaver into a slideshow of your own pictures through Apple's iPhoto. It was indicative that even with the obsolescence of CRTs, screensavers did not fall out of fashion overnight. They served as a way for people to express the sort of honeymoon phase they had with their new computer setup, and they continued to let people know that their machine was still on, it was just inactive. But of course, screensavers did still start to wane in popularity. In fact, with the release of Windows Vista, a ton of these iconic screensavers were removed, with the options being much more limited. This would only continue with further Windows releases. macOS, on the other hand, has essentially kept most of their original screensavers, but with CRTs now being virtually non-existent in the PC world, operating systems have since migrated to power-saving modes that simply put the computer to sleep after inactivity. This has made people accustomed to just leaving their computer on all the time. Thanks to modern sleep modes, the difference is often negligible. So, people no longer need to be reminded that their machine is running. So now, screensavers mostly serve as a distant memory for many younger people. It was something that was such a normal and present part of their daily lives that they just didn't question why they were there or what purpose they served, until they did. This might be a bit weird of a position to take, but I think the peculiar art of screensavers is one of many things that highlights the particular way today's young people analyze and add to pop culture. That is not to say that they are more analytical than previous generations, but certain things they choose to focus on do stand out. I think this is in big part where the whole liminal space thing comes from. Now I understand talking about liminal spaces on YouTube is a bit old hat, but I do believe that screensavers had a part in influencing them. As you may know, liminal space is an aesthetic that focuses on overly bright, campy, and unusually sanitized places that look like they should be public settings, but instead are very isolated and barren. It creates a feeling of dread for a lot of people, because it is a familiar place, but you can tell that something is wrong. Being in an overly pristine place that should be busy and full of people, but just isn't, feels viscerally apocalyptic. A lot of these images are also from the 90s and early 2000s, and there's a few reasons for why. The most obvious one is that today's young people grew up in the 90s and 2000s, but they might only remember bits and pieces of it. They might have a very early memory of going with their family to a bowling alley that looked a lot like a place like this, but they may not remember the context of that memory. They just very faintly remember being there, but they don't remember the specific reason for why they were there. This is where the term liminal takes on both a literal and symbolic definition. Liminal means in between. These are often locations that are not meant to be the final destination, but instead the place that takes you there, such as an airport or train. But it can also be any other place that is in between two different realities, one which is very familiar and one which is very foreign and dreamlike, much like an incomplete memory that eventually shapes you into who you are. This is exactly why the whole backrooms thing is so popular. It is a shared experience that many of today's young people can relate to. As someone who also grew up in that era, it is something I can resonate with as well. And if you look at these early screensavers, they share a lot of characteristics with this liminal space style. These screensavers featured a ton of very bright colors and strange shapes to show off the capabilities of computers. But it was also building on a lot of art trends that were popular at the time, and they directly influenced each other. I go into more detail on this in my Why Did the 90s Look Like That video. But much like these strange places, screensavers were, intentionally or not, creating a familiar yet unnerving place that wasn't real. A place which literally only existed in between states of on and off. And so, screensavers created an unintended, yet very powerful memory for a lot of people. It is an example of people taking what was a necessity to keep things running the way they are supposed to, and transforming it into art, into a sentiment that would help define many aspects of a generation. Instead of burning themselves into CRT monitors, they just burned into us. That sounded way better written down. If you would like to learn more about 90s culture, you can watch my video on that right here, as well as a playlist down below. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Check out patreon.com/nationsquid for ad-free videos and exclusive content. You can also check out my second channel all about the history of the Beatles. A coffee is always appreciated too. Thank you for watching, everyone.